Hello everyone, thank you very much for coming here today. I am George Oram, I'm a senior design engineer in RDD, but also I am a passionate volunteer for the James Dyson Foundation. I got involved in the James Dyson Foundation about 4 years ago to pass on some of my enthusiasm and belief that we should be delivering innovative challenge sessions to schools and also teaching people about the design process that we use here at Dyson to try and further their education. So far I've been to primary schools, secondary schools, universities, and also had the opportunity to go to some of the international events such as the Royal International Air Tattoo at Fairford. During the last 4 years, I've had the opportunity to be part of the James Dyson Award judging panel, so taking the global winners and runners-up from over 27 different countries and channeling them down to the final top 20 for judging for the winner by James. Innovative thinking lies at the core of what Dyson does, and it really fuels what we do. So we as Dyson people really like to try and solve the problems that are around us. The James Dyson Award is all about encouraging people to do exactly that and create innovative products and design solutions to help those real-world, most urgent issues. This panel discussion is a chance to kind of delve a bit deeper into two previous James Dyson Award winners. So Sol and Ryan both won the UK award. And we've all seen the effect that plastic pollution has on our oceans, such as programs such as Blue Planet, or even when you go down your local beach or through the countryside. We've also seen things like food waste. About a third of the food within the world is wasted every single day, and how all of the recycling that we put into our bins isn't always recycled. So now we'll chat to Ryan and Solvegia about their products and how they think that engineering sustainability can be the way forward. So Ryan and Solveig, thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.
So if you could just introduce yourselves to the audience and explain a little bit about who you are and what your product actually is.
Cool. I am Ryan Yasin, and I'm the founder of Petit Pli, clothes that grow with your child. We create clothes that grow through 7 discrete sizes using a structure embedded within the garment that gives it a negative Poisson's ratio, which allows it to grow along its width as well as along its length to mimic the growth of the anatomy of a child. And the reason we do this is to reduce the sort of offcuts at production, reduce the transportation required of shipping 7 times as many garments to different locations around the world, and also to help educate and raise future generations to value the items that they buy in a better way and to essentially consume better and more intelligently. Yeah, that's what we do. We create clothes that grow with your child. Thank you.
My name is Solvegia. I'm the founder of Mimica, and I won the award 4 years ago for a label that tells you exactly when food spoils in order to reduce food waste. It was initially not food waste that I was looking at, though. I initially realized that people with visual impairments had no way of knowing when their food really goes off, and I found that because of that, the people who I was interacting with, it was actually affecting the food that they bought. So they would buy processed foods with like long life dates, and it was actually affecting their health in a significant way. And I found there's such an interesting link between something that you don't really think about, a date, and then someone's health. And that's what I went in to solve. But very quickly, I realized we're all kind of blind to when our food really goes off, and that's why we waste so much, because there's so much buffer time built into our dates that we use. And I was really keen to find a system that solves that. So Mimica Touch, our first product, is a label that is smooth when your food is fresh and turns bumpy when it spoils.
So can you tell us a bit more about how that process, how does it go from smooth to bumpy during the process of the food spoiling?
Yeah, sure. So inside the label kind of is more of a sachet than a label, is a gel that we calibrate to have the same spoilage characteristics as the target food. And we figure out those characteristics by working with the food manufacturer, and we use their shelf life testing data that they have already. And we use that to match the spoilage curves and various temperatures, how we expect the product to perform. And so basically what the gel is doing, it's a solid when it gets set at the start, and it gets set over the plastic ridges that you're going to feel at the end. And what happens when the gel completely spoils or fails, it turns back into the liquid form and breaking the barrier, and then you can feel the bumps underneath, and that's how it works. And the really cool thing is the bumps actually can be built into the actual package that we apply the label to. So you're removing that whole component from it and really building in. So that's the kinds of projects that we're working on with some of the manufacturers we're dealing with.
So I think we've probably all experienced the situation where we've been to the fridge and we've looked at the food and it's just on that cusp of the date and we're not quite sure whether it's okay or not, and we've probably all thrown it away even though it's perfectly safe to eat. And even after that date, by what you're saying, sounds like it could be safe to eat, and that's, as I said earlier, about a third of the world's food is wasted in that way.
Yeah, and 60% of the food that we do throw away is still perfectly edible, which the blame completely lies on expiry dates for that.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. And Ryan, obviously talking about how your clothes work with the negative croissants ratio, can you tell us a bit more about how you came to come by that design and your kind of innovative process for the manufacturing of your clothes?
Yeah, so it's actually really multifaceted. Reflecting on it, I can see where all the sort of journeys have come together to come and form this project. But I studied aeronautical engineering at Imperial College and specialized my dissertation in deployable structures for nanosatellites. So I did a lot of research into origami structures and how to stow away a lot of carbon panels within a 2mm gap and then have them self-deploy outwards in space. And so there was a lot of origami research. I then went to the RCA and did a joint degree between the RCA and Imperial College, where essentially I was looking for more creative ways of using my technical skills, which I'd acquired. And it was only when I was on exchange in Japan that I actually started to look at fashion as more than this sort of superficial realm. I saw how it could bring communities together, and I loved that sort of psychological aspect of how the clothes that you wear can make you associate with someone else. And for me particularly, it helped me find other cyclists who wanted to cycle around Japan, who lived there, and I found myself essentially meeting another group of people who didn't speak a word of English, but we were all together because of a cycling brand. And it was that clothing brand that brought us together and allowed me to experience the country in a different way. And so that's when I started to understand the true power that garments and fashion could have. And at the same time, I was totally in love with how Issey Miyake, for instance, could be seen in an art gallery, but then you could go out on the street and see it on someone just wearing his clothes on the streets. And I was perplexed by how you could manipulate the properties of the fabric by just embedding a structure within that fabric. And I think fabrics are not something that we typically learn so much about in engineering. We're typically modeling struts and looking at metals, woods, and other harder materials, composites, but we don't look at fabrics and how putting a structure in a fabric can totally change the properties it has. It's not really seen as an engineering material. So then when I came back to London, I was like, okay, great, I am going to do a project in fashion. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized how terrible the industry is. We overconsume way too much. I think around 80% of the clothes that get made every year are actually wasted within a year or thrown away. And then 90% of the clothes that we donate to charity are sold to LEDCs, which actually cripple their local industries because they're getting all this sort of brand name clothing. And people who want to start off in a fashion design company in that country are not able to because it's a lot cheaper to buy a practically new diesel pair of jeans at a cut price because they're secondhand and essentially wasted. So then I was like, okay, what can I do to use the skills that I have to try and tackle this and see how I can still be a part of fashion or the garment design industry, but actually create something that can benefit the industry as opposed to steer it and continue steering it in the wrong direction. And that's essentially where I came up with Petit Pli. My sister was having children at that time, and I had bought some clothes from my nephew, and he had already outgrown them by the time he received them, and I realized that children's anatomies are just so different to adults in the sense that they are dynamic in a short span of time. So they're growing, they're changing, whereas adults were relatively constant. So it doesn't really make sense to design a garment which is just a miniaturized piece of adult clothing for this alien that is just growing like crazy in such a short span of time. And I think, yeah, all those roots, the aeronautical, the sort of design, being in Tokyo and seeing how fashion could work on a psychological level and a community level, and then integrating that with problem solving essentially in overconsumption.
Because I think if babies continued growing over their first 2 years of life, for the rest of their life, they'd be the size and the weight of an elephant by the time they're about 30. So it's quite a fascinating insight into terms of weight and size change over such a short period. So we've just heard about how Ryan's gone from kind of aeronautical engineering into fashion design and design of clothing. So tell us about your kind of background and how you developed Bump Mark and then Mimica.
Yeah, of course. So my background was I studied industrial design at university, and it was actually between my second and final year, while I did a year in industry, that I noticed the problem for blind people and expiry dates, because I was working on a transport project for visually impaired people. But during that 6 months, I got to be really, really nosy and ask all the questions of visually impaired people that I'd always wondered about. So I asked them how they know how much milk to put in their tea, and how they match their clothes in the morning. And like for most of these questions, they actually had really cool gadgets to help them out, but not for testing whether their food was still safe to eat or not. But so that's what, kind of where I got that idea, and then that's why I decided to spend my final major project looking at this problem. So obviously I couldn't. My initial inspiration was of a banana that, it was getting older and turning brown and spotty and lumpy, bumpy, and it was clearly saying, I'm older than I used to be. So I wondered whether the whole plastic package could behave in a similar way and kind of start shriveling up and getting all gross and old, and then you would know. So that's where the original idea came from. And I knew that with my industrial design skills only, I wouldn't find the solution to it, and I had to collaborate with a scientist. So I found a chemist on campus who was willing to share some ideas with me, and we kind of collaborated over the year I spent in final year. He gave me the idea for using gels. And actually, the thing behind that was quite interesting, because before he started working at the university, he'd spent 30 years of his career as a chemist working for Kodak and on gelatin print. And his problem was stopping the gelatin decaying so that the photo doesn't go all horrible. And when I was asking him what material can I use that will degrade at the same rate as food, he was like, well, I've got something for you that just won't stop degrading. So it was quite funny. Something that was the bane of his career ended up being the perfect material for me. And so coming from a really industrial design background, I think the way I was taught anyway is that you kind of have to make yourself an expert in whatever you're creating. So I did that by reaching out to people who had expertise way outside the realms of mine, and I think that's actually still how we work at Mimica today. And so we have food scientists working side by side with product designers, and I think I truly believe that's what's going to make us have the best product on the market. So so industrial design background, but somehow a designer ended up running a science company.
And how did you hear about the James Dyson Award and get involved in submitting your projects for that?
So the James Dyson Foundation actually are quite connected with my university. I went to Brunel, and actually every year they pick 6 final major projects while you're still at uni, and they give £1,000 for you to kind of bring your project to the next level and build really good prototypes. And I was one of the projects that were picked, and so it was really great to have that support from the James Dyson Foundation from the very start. And then it was actually just through that link that I got encouraged to apply, and it didn't look like it was going to take very long, so I just went for it. I literally never wanted to start a company. Very unlike Ryan, I literally thought of this as my final major project. I did file a patent for it before I graduated, but that's because I just hadn't spent my the money yet. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I can learn about filing a patent. That'll be something cool to talk about in interviews. So yeah, I filed it. I had no idea 4 years later I would still like so happy that I filed this patent before I told anyone. So yeah, really nice to be supported by the James Dyson Foundation from the start, really.
All right.
Yeah, similarly, Dyson was in Imperial College. I mean, we've got a Dyson School now of Engineering, and as well as the RCA, and also the James Dyson Foundation had come to visit us, and I had won this little 3D printed keychain for a little project that we did. So Dyson was always there in the background.
Can you tell us a bit about your design process? So obviously you came up with like your first prototype and your understanding about your negative Poisson's ratio, how you then have developed that up to where you are now.
Yeah, so we're still in that design process, I guess. We're always designing. It was first looking at the entire problem at hand. I think in engineering, what you want to do is you want to understand as many variables as you can so that you can essentially build an equation to understand what the problem is to begin with. And then you want to simplify that equation down into variables that you can maybe control and some that are dependent on others. And try and build that approximate equation of what the problem is. And for me, going into reducing consumption in the fashion industry, the three main variables that I was looking at was this thing had to be sustainable and ethical, because that was essentially what I wanted it to do. It had to be commercially viable, because if it's not commercially viable, then you're not going to be able to actually have it adopted by anyone, and so it's never going to fulfill its need. And the final was for it to be desirable, again, because if people don't want it, it's not going to have any effect. So then I started mapping out the entire industry from farming crops to point of sale and seeing where I could leverage my skills along that entire map. Came up with 6 projects, which I then took down and distilled at a work in progress exhibition to 3 projects. And at that work in progress exhibition, I was able to talk to sort of potential parents, potential consumers, and see what sort of caught on with them the most. And the biggest one was definitely one size fits all. That was the name of the project at the time. And then from that point onwards, it was just about iterating and sketching. So the first sketch was something that I just made in the oven at home. I just took a little bit of, I sewed some small children's pants, and I had never sewed before. I just bought a sewing machine on Amazon, came the next day, and was like, on YouTube as well, watching these, being taught by these lovely people on YouTube. Made these pants, put them in the oven, cooked them so that the polymers would deform and sort of set in shape. And then I could take a photo of the clothes on my little nephew and then take the photo of it on my older niece and show that the same garment sort of fit both of them. And then that was the sort of image that I could then show people and say, what do you think of this? People in particular were parents. I'd hang around the Wetland Centre in London, where there are lots of families going around looking at birds. And I'd just walk up to them and say, hey, I'm doing a project. Do you mind if I talk to you? I have this idea. And then they'd talk, they'd give me insights. I knew I was still onto something. Even though there were people who maybe disagreed with it at the time, it just helped me sort of refine my idea even more. So one of the biggest things was, it's synthetic. So I'm not going to put synthetic garments on my child. But then I took a step back and realized that, okay, how can we use synthetics? Because we still need to use them to be able to embed that polymer deformation and be able to machine wash them and take care of them really easily and have easy adoption. Well, we're only going to focus on outerwear. We're only going to make waterproof garments, and those are the highest value items that parents have to buy, and we're going to change this problem and turn it to our benefit. So again, iterating the design, I interned at a pleating factory where I was able to have more of a hands-on approach and use the sort of equipment and tooling and machinery that was already available, so I could understand how the industry operates, how, if I was actually going to take this to market, what are the sort of resources that I have available, because what you don't want to do is design something that's so bespoke that you won't even be able to manufacture it in a commercially viable way, or you'd have tooling costs which were so high that you'd never be able to get started. And from that, it was just refining the concept, improving the design, constant communication with our customers or potential consumers. And last summer, we ran a beta test launch where we sold, soft launch, where we sold 100 sets of garments. And essentially what we have now is an army of 100 families who are testing our product and telling us what to improve, because we're going to improve it and give them the next version for free. And yeah, I mean,
come on, Brian, tell them the whole story about your beta launch. So how did you get people? How did you get those 100 people?
So we built a mailing list of 5,000 people, and from that we sent out an early access form, and they had to fill out an early access form to be able to have the opportunity to purchase our garments. So we had, in the end, around 1,000 people who filled out a form and wrote a paragraph on why they should be selected to purchase our garments, and then we read through each answer and chose them and classed them 5-star to 1-star based on how beneficial we thought that their future feedback would be to us and our company. And then we invited them, one by one, or class by class. 5-star class, 4-star class. And yeah, we completely sold out in a weekend, just through our mailing list, no marketing spend whatsoever. And these people are pretty incredible. I mean, they're just emailing us pictures of their kids around the world, whether it's in Norway, South Africa, England, anywhere, Australia, US. We wanted to get a truly global perspective to, one, understand the way people would react in terms of the design, and two, just to see how the garments reacted in different environments and different temperatures. So we're getting a lot of data, essentially, from all these people testing our product now. And we're iterating the design and continuing to build our supply chains internationally, from Taiwan to Portugal to London, and getting set to do a bigger launch next year, early next year.
So it's quite an innovative way of trying to sell your products, getting people to physically apply. They still had to buy your product as well, and sign up to deliver feedback on that product that they then bought. So it's quite an interesting way of launching your product.
Yeah, flipping the dynamic.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
We just wanted people who truly wanted the product and truly wanted to help us to have the product. And this seemed like the most logical way to do that. And we were relatively confident that we'd hit the correct conversion ratios on how many people we've got on our mailing list and how many items we're choosing to sell to that population.
So it's quite an innovative kind of design-led process as well of what you're talking about. It's quite similar to some of the stuff that we do here at Dyson. A few more inventive things, I think. So about your product, so taking it from understanding that kind of chemistry and gelatin level from the ex-Kodak chemist. So how do you then develop that into Mimica that's launching soon?
So, I mean, the first thing when I decided after the madness of winning the national award, I mean, retailers were just getting in touch with me saying, if you make this, we'll buy it from you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? This is my university project. I also don't think they realized it was just like me. They were like, well, our people will come to your people. And I'm like, I've got no people.
I am that person.
Yeah. Can you please send that to your accounts department? And I'm like, that'll be me then. Anyway. So that's when I realized there's a huge market opportunity here, and I had to go see what would happen. Like I would be kicking myself if I didn't find out what would happen if I didn't take this forward. So the first thing I needed was some scientists, because the guy at the university wanted to stay at the university, and also a lab, which in London there are no labs in London. So I managed to hire my first scientist, which was really awesome, using some further grant funding that I'd applied for. We basically decided that universities are going to be the best way to go in terms of like cost effectiveness, expertise already in the university, because even though I'd hired this scientist, like she'd never worked with gels before, so and it's really it's like such a niche area of expertise as well. So we were looking through all of these different universities, and then we actually found at the University of Chester, they had set up this food research center, and within that food research center they had a gels research lab which had all the equipment under the sun we could ever wanted, and the world leading expert in gels leading the department, which is awesome. So obviously we partnered with them, and we're still working with them today. And so obviously a lot of the development has happened in terms of the chemistry, so I can't speak so much about that because I haven't been involved with that day to day. What I have been involved with is a lot of user testing, so figuring out how people are going to interact with this, what they expect of it from it. Are people actually looking at date labels in the supermarket? So I ran quite a large study where I followed people around with their consent around the supermarket and kind of had them voice out loud what information they were looking for and that kind of thing, not telling them I was looking at expiry at all, and then follow them home, watch them how they put their food away. And it was so many insights that you can get from that. And for example, my first version, the version that I won the award with, it was like a triangular shaped label, and the thinking behind that, because if it was triangular shaped, it would always have to be put in the top left side corner of the package. And so by standardizing it, if you're visually impaired, you'd always know where to look for it, because that was actually an issue that came up when I was testing with visually impaired people. However, when I started testing with sighted people, no one, I gave them a package with the triangle thing on it, and no one could even see it because they were looking, I told them it's an expiry label, and they were all looking down to where they expect the expiry date to be, and they couldn't even see it even though it was right there on the package. So I was like, okay, can't be triangular anymore. So now we changed the shape, and I did a lot of research into the what bump shape would give the best feedback to your finger. So what I found is actually by asking people to do a dragging motion, and the more your skin moves, it fires more neurons to your brain, and you can feel it more. So actually we changed the whole bump structure. We found out the best I was working on the best distance between the bumps and that kind of thing. So kind of technical things in that aspect. And then finally the design element of it as well. So what I always worried about, because no one's really experienced freshness through touch before. Well, I guess we kind of have avocados, watermelons, we still kind of interact with them. So I knew it wasn't completely alien, but in terms of people being so used to dates, I wanted to kind of have a teaching element to it. So on our new version of the labels, we actually have, it's a two-part label. So one of them is it's always just smooth, and it says smooth for comparison. And then we have an active side, which is the actual label, which is the dynamic side that actually changes from smooth to bumpy. So then when it goes bumpy, you can be like, aha, this is what smooth did feel like. And so we're kind of helping people along learning that. And eventually we won't need that smooth for comparison side of the label, but that's an interesting element that we just added this year. And so yeah, we're now at the point where we're scaling up the label finally for manufacture to run our first trials in the UK early next year. We're going to be making about probably 100,000 labels to do our first trial, because it has to be a statistically significant amount for the manufacturer that we're working with. And yeah, that's been a whole other set of challenges, because what worked in the lab won't work so well when you're manufacturing it, and we want to make sure that the manufacture process isn't going to hurt the chemistry that we've put into it. So it's a really careful kind of adjustment process right now that we're going through to the manufacture stage. But at the end of it, we're going to have labels on shelves, and it's so nice throughout the whole journey, people will be like, can't wait to see them in supermarkets. And I'm like, me too. Because it feels like it's taken so long, but I'm really proud of my whole team and what we've achieved.
So Sol was the winner in 2014, the UK winner. So 4 years on, we're still almost getting it to market. So what challenges have you faced over that time, and how have you overcome them, or are we still seeing future challenges ahead?
I mean, obviously there's going to be so many challenges ahead, and there've been so many challenges in the past. I think there was obviously personal challenges in terms of me never having run a company before. So I was just telling some of your colleagues earlier, so when I hired my first team, I was so focused on what we had to do next, and they were like, excuse me, are we not going to get employee reviews? And I'm like, okay, what happens in those? Like, I've never actually been employed before, so do you want to tell me what that looks like? I'm actually just making this up. So that's obviously been a challenge, like pretending to be someone's boss when, like, you know. And then on the actual like product side, it's just what we're doing is completely new. And so there was no really previous chemistry that we could look to. So we were really starting from scratch, which is why it's taken 4 years. And I think a challenge to keep us going has been funding, to make sure that we can continue running the lab, like, you know, all week, every week, rather than just like booking in lab tests whenever we need them. I was really committed to running a lab all of the time. So funding, and then yeah, just figuring out how you can take something that's going to work on the lab bench and making sure it's going to work when you scale it to millions of units as well. Yeah.
So Ryan, obviously you've said you've done your beta launch, and then most traditional garments are then manufactured out in the Far East. What approach are you taking for the manufacturing of yours?
Ours is a little bit complicated because it's harder to make the garment, and so we can't just say, oh, we want to design these styles and just try. We have to try every single thing and try out different construction methods with the different structure embedding methods. And so at the moment, for our beta launch, we made everything here in the UK. However, the entire supply chain is decentralized across a factory in Taiwan who sends fabrics to the UK, and then 3 factories here in the UK who deal with different parts of the manufacturing process. So now we are looking at using the UK supply chain as an R&D base and maybe outsourcing to Portugal. We found one particular factory who can do probably everything in-house, as well as give us some further design scope for adding different functionalities, such as the garment changing color as it grows, revealing stripes within the under pleat, for instance, so it's something that's always changing with time, and so kids won't get bored with it, for instance, or it'll just add another element of delightfulness and just open up our design potential and possibilities. So yeah, so we're looking at all the options at the moment because there are complications involved with all of those. It does take a lot of time to form those relationships with suppliers. We've been dealing with suppliers in the Far East for some stuff, but most of it has been in the UK in terms of manufacture.
So in terms of like sustainability within the fashion industry, what do you see kind of exists at the moment, and do you see any trends going forward?
So I think it's a topic that's talked about a lot these days, especially in the last couple of years. I would warn people to look out for sort of greenwashing. There are lots of big labels who say they're sustainable or ethical and are really just using that as a marketing angle, and they're seeing it as a trend, so people want to buy things that are sustainable and ethical, so we'll just market it like this, but really we're just twisting the story a little bit. And yeah, I mean, it's us as consumers who hold that power to vote for the brand leaders that we want, and with every purchase we make, we're actually voting for a particular company to continue doing work and continue designing and innovating. So I would just urge people to vote into something that pushes the industry, any industry that you're looking at purchasing from, into a more sort of innovative and better way, something that's more sustainable, something that is looking out for future generations, as opposed to trying to cut costs left, right, and center and driving that industry into a really negative way. So I'm sure maybe that the huge behemoth fashion brands, fast fashion brands, don't necessarily want to be horrible people, and they don't want unethical supply chains and so on, but that's how their business model began, and they've just grown so big now that I think it's extremely difficult perhaps for some of them to change, or perhaps there are just too many people involved and some people are greedy, or if you think about it like a huge ship, it's going to take a while to turn that ship around, whereas if you're a little speedboat, you can just quickly. So I just champion.
And even though these choices might be a bit more expensive now, as you grow the demand, the cost should come down as well. So that's the power that we have as a collective consumer body as well. Yeah. Really cool.
Because there are a few companies come up with kind of like organic cotton clothing and things like that, trying to be a little bit more sustainable, but obviously the ultimate is something that perhaps grows. Yeah, well, I mean, increasing the life of the stuff that we buy, the life cycle, is the best opportunity we have. So I think the Waste and Resources Actions Program said that if we increase the utilization of the garments we wear and decrease our consumption, that's our best means of reaching our wastewater and carbon emission targets by 2030. And so you've just come back from Summit. Do you want to talk a bit more about kind of sustainability within the food industry, and then some other wider bits you've been doing as part of your company?
Yeah, sure. So food industry, so there's loads going on in terms of reducing food waste. It's not all about expiry dates, and it's really cool to see all the other innovative ways people are working on this problem. So something that you can all do today to help cut food waste is download an app called Olio, OLIO, and it's basically an app that helps you share surplus food with your neighbours. So you just snap a picture, and if you have something extra, if you're about to go on holiday, someone can come pick it up. And really easy, and so I actually know the founders behind Olio, and they're doing really, really well. It's really popular in London. So start a community around here as well. And then there's other companies that are actually taking products that would have otherwise gone to waste and turning them into, and turning them into new products. So, for example, there's Snacked, which makes kind of sustainable, delicious snacks for kids mostly, made out of like surplus fruit from the supply chains. And there's Rubies in the Rubble that make chutneys made out of like ugly fruit and vegetables that weren't otherwise used. And my personal favorite is Toast Ale. It's beer brewed from like wasted bread, which is from sandwich companies. They don't use the end bits of the loaves. So all of those are now made into beer, which you can buy in most supermarkets now called Toast. So really exciting to see those. And around conferences that I go to, it's really nice to interact with various kind of cool things happening around the world.
Excellent. Wanted to kind of give you guys in a few minutes the opportunity to ask any questions to Ryan and Sol. So if you've got any in mind, just hold them for a little bit, and we'll get to them just in a second. But I wanted to thank you two for coming today and for talking to us. I hope you found it quite interesting learning about the two products and a bit about their journey as well, and how they've gone from university all the way through to kind of being a business owner and leading people in their product development, and hopefully launching to market very soon. I think we'll all be pretty excited to hear about these products and to see them on the shelves. So does anyone have any specific questions that they'd like to ask?
Thank you very much. That was awesome. Ryan, quick question.
Yeah.
Once the kid has grown and the garments have grown with the kid, is it possible for the garment to be reshrunk and given to the subsequent one?
Yeah. So they're almost elastic, like an elastic band. So if you can pull them, they'll go back in shape. They're always resetting when you're wearing them, so they're always moving in synchrony with the motion of the child. So in that sense, they're also giving an added benefit of an unrestricted motion for the child, which typically they don't have with a waterproof jacket, which has been bought, a couple of sizes too big, and they're just walking around like floating inside this thing. So yeah, it is designed for that, and we've used ripstop material to try and increase the longevity and life of that fabric as much as possible, and we'll find out after more testing how long that really lasts.
Thanks for the talk. Really, really interesting ideas. I just wondered, like, when you spell out your journey now, sort of in hindsight, everything seems to make so much sense. Obviously, a lot of sort of insight and thought has gone into your ideas as well. Was there a point, I guess a question for both of you, a point where it kind of just clicked and thought, this is actually a really viable idea, I can make this into sort of a business?
I think for me was when the first food manufacturer, I found that it was really easy to get retailers on board. Like, they're the ones who were really contacting me after I won the award and stuff, and it was really easy to get them on board. But then I'd be like, great, and then they would be like, yeah, but you still need to get my food supplier on board. So I would get introductions to all the food suppliers I wanted under the sun, but actually when it came from the retailer's introduction, they felt a bit like it was something they were being forced to do. And when we decided to look at it from a completely different perspective and really get to know the food manufacturer first, and then get them to introduce us to their favorite retailer, which was a bit more of a challenge. But when the first manufacturer that we spoke to, Arla, were really behind us, and they wanted to do a paid trial. They didn't even question whether who's going to pay for it. They were like, send us the bill. That's when we realized that when a huge company like that, they're the largest dairy company in Europe, wanted to put their money behind it, that's when I was sure.
And for me, so when I was talking about that equation before, one of them had to be commercially viable. So my student project would just be a portfolio piece if I hadn't taken it to a business. So I actually formed the company before graduating, and I knew that, okay, I want to try to actually make this live in the world as its own self-containing cell. So yeah, I mean, from the very start, I was just like, the only way to have this problem fulfill me, the solution fulfill me, is to make sure it's a business as well.
Mm-hmm.
But so many people along the way try to knock you down. And I mean, at the beginning, it was the users who were just saying, no, this is a terrible idea, don't follow through. And then it was, potential investors. No, first it was lawyers. So I wanted to get the patent filed. So I was going to different attorneys and saying, could you fund this yourself, and maybe take a little bit of the patent itself. And they were saying, no, it's not really what we do, especially when you're talking about fashion. People are just like, whoa, this is a really volatile sector.
Mm-hmm.
And I know nothing about this industry, so I am not going to risk. A lot of people are into de-risking. So then it was them, and then it was trying to get investors on board. And again, the whole de-risking situation with fashion and trends, they were like, oh, is this trend going to go away next month? I don't know. So you're constantly fighting your corner.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say the biggest thing that I've learned is just having persistence over the last couple of years. And just, if you believe in the idea and you think that it'll benefit society, benefit other people, and also allow you to do something that you really want to, then, I mean, just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And keep fighting for it.
I was just going to ask, with a lot of people trying to move away from some of the plastic packaging on food, how do you envisage your sort of labels being transferred across to whatever's coming next?
I think I am so behind less plastic being used overall. However, supermarkets are still going to exist, and parcels of meat are still going to have to be transported in some way. They're not just going to be laid in a pile in the supermarket. So they are going to be in some package or another, realistically, whether that's a bioplastic or whether that ends up looking completely different in a few years. I guess we need to adapt as things change. But right now, there's still plenty of opportunity of things we can apply a label to and reduce waste in those categories that still do.
I'd say you've both come up with ideas that go above and beyond what regulation is in place, like with food labelling or with clothes and sustainable supply chains. Have you, since getting exposure for your idea, had any opportunity to do anything on a regulatory side? Because regulations to me are sort of what bureaucrats do in big buildings, and that's not really what young people have an input in. So has that opened doors for you? And do you think there's more potential for young entrepreneurs to have more of a say in regulations?
Go ahead.
I personally speaking, I think we're too small at the moment too. I think as time goes by and we grow and we have someone who can sort of have that job of going to government and pushing a message, and also using our contacts at sort of Innovate UK and so on, then we'll be able to. But at the moment, we don't have enough resource to. We don't have enough resource to, so we can't. So, but I imagine that in the future we probably will be able to if we grow, when we grow large enough.
For us, actually, we've been lucky enough where the regulatory boards have been contacting us, asking us what's the outlook on this space, and there's only two main pieces of legislation around smart packaging. The first one is that if it contains some sort of non-food material inside it, it has to have a do not eat on it. And the other one is that if whatever material is whatever the kind of smart material is, there has to be a functional barrier between it and the food. So at the moment we're adhering to all of those, which are fairly easy, but in terms of like, you know, it's a scary place looking at smart expiry labeling without regulation, because until there's regulation, we're asking consumers to trust us where we set the thresholds. And we run the company in a completely ethical way because that's what we set out to do. But that's why we need to be really protective of our brand as well, making sure that if people decide to copy, and they set the thresholds all over the place, that can actually affect human health and safety. And so I feel very strongly that this is an area that needs to be regulated, and we should hold ourselves to a standard where within, I don't know, say that regulation is within 5% of real accuracy of the food spoilage or something. And that's something that we're telling the regulators we'd like to see, which sounds bizarre that we're trying to put regulations on ourselves, but I guess that's how much we are behind what we're doing. And those regulations need to be in place to keep people safe.
You pretty much solved the problem with, I guess, clothes growing with the kid as they're younger. But like you were saying with the fashion industry, I think you said 90% of clothes are essentially binned within a year. So I guess with trends changing and stuff, have you got any plans in the future for sort of, I guess, more pushing your message to people like that might not necessarily care about how sustainable it is and they just want to get the next best thing?
Yeah, so our strategy right now is not to focus on our generation, but to focus on the next generation, because they're the ones who are going to be having the most effect in a few years when we're larger. So if we can start to instill those values in the next generation and tell them, like, don't buy as much and buy better, buy more intelligently, then we feel as though, obviously it's all theoretical, but we feel as though that will have a definite effect. And yeah, it's just pushing the message really of championing innovation and not, I mean, what is the use in sort of recycling fashion trends? Why are we, this is the most intimate product that we own. It's on our skin. Yet it's still made in the same archaic ways that it has been for many, many years. We've just changed the material, for instance. So why can't we, have digital fibers that change shape or change color to fulfill those needs that we still want of getting confidence or changing our style or looking different or reacting to different environments, seeing as this is our second skin. I just feel as though there's a lot more we can do, and yeah, we just need to keep pushing that message of innovate in this sphere. Don't try and make it cheaper, because then we're just never going to get anywhere. Mm-hmm. It's going to be too expensive for anyone else to innovate in that.
So you're saying you're getting support from the kind of the manufacturers as well as the kind of the retailers. Have you had any resistance from, for example, obviously there is a lot of food waste, but that drives more sales, because if people are going to throw their food away, they're therefore going to buy more. Have you had resistance that if there's going to be less wastage, there's going to be less purchase? Have you had a resistance from that side of things? Obviously it's less ethical, but in terms of money-wise, if the big companies are driving for that, would that hinder the developments and deployment of your idea?
I'm smiling because you've just articulated one of the biggest misconceptions in the food industry, that driving waste increases sales. The reason why that's not true is because at the moment, I don't know if many people realize, but on perishable products, in-store waste is about 17%. So 17% of all the stock that gets delivered to stores will never get sold, and that comes out of the retailer's bottom line. They are always banging on about shelf life extension, because if they can keep that bottle of milk for a day extra on the shelf, they're way more likely to sell it. And so that's exactly what they want to do. And what we also found from previous studies is that when you extend shelf life, people actually buy more because they can see it's actually going to last until the end of the weekend. And that is at the expense of the top-up shops that people might do throughout the week. And so, I mean, waste is always going to be wasteful. Like, it makes no sense for farmers to produce twice the amount that they need to just to deliver half of the amount that is required. It's affecting everyone's bottom line, and waste is always something that supermarkets and food manufacturers are trying to reduce, because, you know, creating surplus costs them money, whether it's wasted by the consumer in the end or by them. Like, they can't control where it's going to get wasted, and so if they can reduce waste overall, they're improving their own margins. And even by reducing their in-store waste by half a percentage point, they can increase their bottom line by 17%. So it makes no sense for them to try to drive waste, actually, and that's not what they're trying to do. And I think a lot of people think that that's what supermarkets are trying to do, which is not the case.
Children's wear brands, on the other hand, they thrive off of people growing out of their clothes. So, yeah. But our business model is just to, you know, champion innovation, deliver a better product, which is more expensive to begin with, but is competitive and sort of cheaper in the long run for the end user, and can allow us to still operate.
Great. I just wanted to say thank you very much, Sol and Ryan, for coming to talk to us today. And I think we've all found that really informative, so thank you very much.
Thank you.